You're listening to the Two Tongues Podcast. And now your hosts, Kyle and Chris.
Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of the Two Tongues Podcast, where today we're not doing opinion scholarship. We're not doing Kyle and I's playful exchanges. We're doing something a little different. I wanted to come up with a segment that I could do that maybe wouldn't take as much time as to produce as my solo episodes, the opinion scholarship episodes. And with Kyle and I hitting and missing with our schedules, wanted to get some more out there, and kind of had a little bit of a serendipitous thing happen the other day. And I think maybe it opens up a window for episodes like this. So I'm going to give this an experiment today. If this works, we'll call this segment Flashes of Insight. So let me just get right into it. All right. So as you guys know, I have a long-running series on Carl Jung's infamous Red Book. Here it is, the Red Book. I've playfully named those episodes Gandalf the Red. Coincidentally, I do have part 9 coming out very soon. It's literally the longest running series we've done outside of the Maps of Meaning, Jordan Peterson stuff in season 1. Just keeps going on and on and on. But it's filled with just tremendous stuff. And I chose the title Gandalf the Red because Jung's process for generating the stories that the Red Book contains reminds me of ritual magic. Like, it really does remind me of something like ritual magic. Jung was for sure a modern day shaman and mystic, in addition to being a world-renowned and pioneering psychologist. I think he was a mage. He was a magician of a kind, and therefore Gandalf. And I'm fascinated by his approach, which, if you remember, he calls active imagination. It's a kind of meditative lucid dreaming. Like, he had the ability to capture his unconscious ideas and impulses, embodying them in figures of his imagination. And once they were there in the field of his imagination, he would enter in and engage with them. Like summoning a fairy or some otherworldly spirit. Like, he made them manifest, and then he asks things of them. He would poke and prod this way at the contents of his own unconscious in order to learn from them, in order to better understand his self, and to discover, as he would say, his own depths. And as much as I'm fascinated by this approach, I've never had much luck in reproducing it. I mean, I want to discover my depths too, but I'm going to need my own process. And that brings me to the episode today. I think I may have found my process, my active imagination. I'm sorry to disappoint. While I can't make the contents of my unconscious into imaginary, interactive scenes in my mind, I am aware of moments when the unconscious spills over into my consciousness. It's always fleeting, never lingers long enough to be considered in any depth, but it does happen. Okay, these are flashes of insight or lines of inquiry that pop into my mind unbidden and fade immediately into obscurity usually. And this happens reliably when I'm not expecting it. When I'm in a flow state, when I'm jogging around the neighborhood or sitting in a sauna, driving long distance in the car, or sitting in a tree stand deep in the woods. In these moments, when my inner voice is quiet, the unconscious whispers. These are thoughts, questions, or ideas that materialize, laden with unrealized meaning, or images that pull my attention inexplicably towards them. Well, something of that kind happened to me today. I was deep in my own head, exercising. I was listening to JRE episode 2467, where Joe Rogan was talking with Michael Pollan, and it happened. And when it did, I thought to myself, could I make this into my active imagination? Like, rather than letting these events pass as unexamined curiosities or synchronicities, could I try poking and prodding them like Jung did? Could I explore the unconscious this way and perhaps discover what it's trying to tell me? Well, let's give it a try. I want to tell you how the experience played out while I was watching this listening to this Joe Rogan episode. I just want to try to describe exactly how I experienced these sorts of epiphanies and just talk through it and see where it goes. So here's how my experience played out. I'm going to call this first one, because there's two of them here today. I'm going to call the first epiphany, why ego death equals mystical experience. Why ego death equals mystical experience. All right, here we go. Try to put yourself in my shoes for a second. Exercising kind of in my own head and maybe a little bit absent-minded, thinking about nothing, and suddenly, bam. Okay, Michael Pollan said something. I don't remember exactly, but something about the diminishing of the ego. And suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, I'm struck by an image and an epiphany all at once. The image is something like the Taoist yin yang, but in motion. Okay, if you imagine the white side growing and rotating, while the black side shrinks in proportion, and the same things happening in the opposite direction and back and forth, you'll have some idea of what I saw in my mind's eye. But this isn't all. Okay, the image wasn't just an image, it represented a meaning, but one that was written in a language I didn't immediately understand. It took a little time, and slowly the meaning starts to come into focus, and I understand something. I understand that the white paisley of the yin-yang represents ego, the conscious part of the psyche. And the black paisley represents the unconscious part, the deeper, mysterious part that I associate with the divine. So in some sense, it's consciousness on one side and the unconscious on the other, but just as well expressed as myself or ego on one side and the cosmic self or God on the other. And further, I understood the waxing and waning of each side represents the relationship between them. As one side increases, the other side necessarily decreases. And this is so because they are, despite their apparent opposition, one unified thing. Consciousness and unconsciousness, ego and God. I understood that to diminish one's identity with ego is to increase one's identity with God. Like applying weight to a teeter-totter, right? One side rises as the other falls. From this immediate revelation, my mind began to organize a constellation of meaning to fill in the gaps, right? To help me understand or intellectualize the experience. And I'm remembering quotes by philosophers, psychologists, and psychonauts who speak about achieving ego death, and in so doing, eliciting a mystical experience. These are experiences that they would call religious. Experience of awareness expanded beyond their physical bodies or beyond the realm of ordinary reality. And again, I see the teeter-totter with shrinking ego on one end and expanded consciousness on the other. And I receive the message: to reduce the ego is to discover more truly what we are. Diminish the ego, and you will find God. Okay, now as this is developing, I have another element, another part of these constellation of ideas that kind of takes over. It falls upon me. And I'm reminded of Jesus, who voluntarily emptied himself. The Orthodox Church calls this kenosis, or self-emptying. Famously in the Beatitudes, Jesus calls this out as spiritually desirable. You might remember in Matthew 5, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And the question strikes me, what if to be poor in spirit is to diminish the ego? To be poor in ego, right? The spirit of self or of personal identity. And what then is the consequence of becoming poor in spirit? Now, as quickly as these questions came, the answers came in a flash. In my mind's eye, I remember what Jesus said in the book of John. He prays for humanity in John chapter 17. He says, quote, that they may be one, Father, even as we are one. So to empty oneself, to push down the ego, is to become one with God. And if to become one with God is not a description of a mystical experience, then I don't know what is. It also allows me to make sense of John 5, where Jesus says, the Son can do nothing of himself. Why? Because it's not Jesus acting, but God acting through him. Not Jesus' will, right? But thy will be done, as Jesus says in Matthew. This is why ego death constitutes a mystical experience. Because to empty yourself is to recognize that you are not empty after all. There is something that remains, like hope at the bottom of Pandora's box. It's still you, but something fundamental, something divine. Okay, so that brings you through a description of the way that I experience this epiphany and this sort of process of making sense of it or grasping the meaning that's imposed kind of from the beginning. So what I would like to do is end this little section here in the same way that Aesop's fables do, right? I want to tell you the story, then I want to tell you the moral. So I'm going to call this, rather than the moral, I'll call this the insight. So the insight was something like, the path to God lies in suppression of ego. To lose one's personal self is to realize that our selfhood does not perish with it. When ego dies, we remain. And so we must be more than mere ego. What we are at the deepest level is God. And that brings me to epiphany number 2. I'm going to call this one, Why Ego Death Feels Good. So again, put yourself in my shoes, exercising, listening to Rogan, talking to Michael Pollan. Just got done having this kind of interesting, introverted, experience, thinking through this insight, and another one falls. So later on in this episode, Michael Pollan says something that again set my mind reeling. He made a remark about the sense of euphoria that people often report with ego death experiences. And my mind latched a hold of the question and wouldn't let go. And the question was, why does ego death feel good? And just like before, I find my mind flooded with associations, like mental tentacles groping around in every direction, trying to find the most relevant meaning, trying to help me understand why this question has gripped me. I receive flashes of memories from my own ego death-driven mystical experience. I remember the fear and trembling of it all, of the ego shrinking, which sent my body into a panic. I felt as though I was dying, or feared that I might be. Something within me identified this experience as a mortal threat. I experienced a fight or flight reaction, heart racing, anxiety, sweaty palms. And as these thoughts began to wane, I felt the weight of paradox descending. Again, a question arises in me. If ego death is euphoric, why would my body be so fearful of it? Good feelings are supposed to reinforce behaviors, aren't they? The sweet taste of sugar drives us to eat. Sexual pleasure drives us to procreate. Like pleasure reinforces behaviors. It keeps us coming back for more. So what's going on with ego death then? I know it's accompanied by euphoria, and yet my psyche flails and twists to prevent it, like a fly trying to free itself from the spider's web. Why should this be? And the answer falls on me, and I understand that our deepest human instinct is towards survival. To the psyche, ego death is indistinguishable from real death. And the ego is our greatest tool for survival, after all. So when it shrinks into insignificance, panic and anxiety are appropriate reactions. But what about the euphoria, I ask myself? Why should it exist at all? If evolution preserves those things which are beneficial to our survival and reinforces them above all, why should we experience pleasure when succeeding in killing our ego? Why should evolution preserve a behavior which runs exactly contrary to our base survival instinct? Why in this one instance does evolution drive us towards death? There must be a reason, I tell myself. But what? It's as if nature is saying, survive at all costs, but for those who see through our base instincts and are brave enough to push beyond them, there is a hidden reward. For those who are curious and careful, there is gnosis to be had. And I'm reminded of my attraction towards treasure hunting and stories of heroes who face death and danger in order to find the thing most valuable. I'm reminded of the Gospels when Jesus speaks of the kingdom of heaven as a great treasure buried in a field and selling everything you have in order to buy the field. To risk all, you might say, even death, for the hope of finding that treasure. So there's something worth dying for, and therefore something which evolution must preserve, even if it runs against its primary objective. Why? Well, because it's worth the risk, right? To kill the ego and encounter God, to become one with God. This is the one treasure worth dying for, the one you cannot achieve without that ego death. This is why evolution preserves and reinforces a behavior which runs contrary to our survival instinct. Because this one specific human experience is worth dying for. And then, just as I begin to feel satisfied with this explanation, another possibility surfaces. What if this is not just the one experience worth dying for, but the very purpose of life itself? And that brings me to the insight here, the moral of the story. Ego death feels good for the same reason anything pleasurable feels good, as a mechanism to reinforce the behavior that seeks it out. Evolution permits an anti-survival instinct in this one and only one scenario, because the evolutionary payoff outweighs the risk. What does it mean? It means that nature contains one instinct more important than survival. More than survival, it desires oneness with God.
Well, there you have it. That's one avenue explored, but infinitely more still to go. I hope you enjoyed thinking along with us. I know. It's not easy work. Thinking. It's hard and full of uncertainties, but I'm grateful for the company as we trek through this together. Here's to hoping that the juice is worth the squeeze. See what I did there? Let's find out together in the next episode.